And we think we have started already. I think this is broadcasting already. And well, yes, I'm very happy to be here again with you. Today we're going to have like very just wait because I'm moving my chair and I'm like arranging everything here. Well, yes, today we're going to have a nice session. We're going to be working with this thing about teaching skills, different skills. Yesterday we had a wonderful and I think meaningful session in which we talk about the integrated skills lessons or classes, in which we learned how important it was to understand the communicative cycle as a process in which the skills work together so they have a result that is communication. We learned that no skill is more important than the other, and we also learned that all the skills work together so for the learners and the teachers to be able to communicate in real life situations and real life scenarios in which language was more practical and language was more meaningful and useful for students, right? We talked about something interesting about different skills. We made a lot of reflection about how important it was to have integrated skills lessons, etc., etc., etc. So I hope all of you guys have learned a lot yesterday from yesterday's class, and today we are going to continue working with two specific skills. Those are listening and speaking. Those are really important because we consider them as like the most important thing when we are in an English classroom is production, especially oral production. It could be a mistake, it could be a misconception of the importance, or like I will rephrase because I'm getting confused. Hi, Aurea. Yeah, some teachers might believe that speaking is the most important thing because that's like more it's more it's like a more tangible evidence that our students are going through the right path in terms of learning, right? Why? Because we can observe, we can listen to them speaking, we can even show other people that they're speaking already. But let's remember that in terms of learning a new language, speaking is not the only way of production, right? And that's not the only evidence we can have about students' progress or students' learning. Yes, I will ask you please to write your names down or just say hi so I know that you are working with me already. I think now I'm working with Raquel and also Aurea. Aurea is here, and I'm also waiting for other students to join. And meanwhile, I'm going to start sharing the presentation I prepared for you today. Well, next class, we're going to have like some games. I was thinking of how we could play using technology and in different ways and traditional ways also. And yeah, I have some ideas that probably can work for us, right? Uh, just wait. Okay. So today, as I told you, we're going to work with teaching speaking and teaching listening. Coco, hello and welcome, Imelda. It's nice to know that you are here. It's really nice to have you here working one more session. And well, as always, I'm very excited about this class because there are a lot of new things and interesting things we can discuss and we can learn about. So I'm really excited. I'm really happy because we have another opportunity to learn more and to continue exploring this interesting field of teaching English as a second language. I'm excited also because, well, I've been teaching English for the last 12 years, and I always realize that there's still so much to learn in terms of like language proficiency and language mastery, but also in terms of theory behind teaching and theory behind language. I was reflecting about how important it is for everyone who teaches in front of a class, in front of a group, to know all this theory, because it's not just a matter of knowing a language, right? I mean, I speak Spanish like natively, but I cannot teach Spanish, and I wouldn't dare to do that, you know, because I don't know so many things about my own language, like in terms of theory, in terms of concepts, that I wouldn't dare to teach that language. I think I know more English in terms of theory, in terms of concepts. So that's why I feel more comfortable when teaching English. And nevertheless, there's still like some mistakes I make. There's some like pronunciation problems I have. But reading this book and reading this information has actually given to me a lot of like, I feel released. I feel peace now about how I speak and how I communicate, because I could realize that there's like more important things than just correctness in language, right? It's not just a matter of accuracy, it's not just a matter of fluency. You will see later on why I am telling you those things. Well, the book we're working with is this one that is called Teaching by Principles, right? An interactive approach to language pedagogy. And is a book that was written by H. Douglas Brown, and I don't know the name. I don't know how to pronounce the other name. Is Ki Young Lee, something like that. I'm going to show the name uh, because I want to be respectful with that person, and I apologize. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but this is a wonderful book. It's not an advertisement. It's not like I'm selling the book, but yeah, if you can get it, do it. Right? This is like a Bible for English teachers or for any other languages teachers. But it's really interesting. Like all the resources you have, all the material you find here, the reflections and the information. Yeah, like you should definitely get this book, right? I love this book because it has like some emotional price or value. I don't know how to say that, because it was the material we used back there in the University of Arkansas in a course we have in regards of English teaching. So it was really cool because they gave this book to us. So it was a gift, and I learned so much from this book. So I really recommend you to get this book, buy it, and read it. Right? There's so many like interesting things you should know. Okay, well, let's go to business. Uh, I learned a lot today, like this evening, that I was reading and I was trying to get more information to share with you. And I think this is really difficult, because I have to make like a really small summary, a very brief summary of all this interesting information. And then I have to decide for you. I have to choose what information is more important for you than the other. And I hope I did a great job. I really hope that, because I am really expecting you guys to learn a lot from today's lesson. The title of the book, Aura, it's Teaching by Principles, right? That's the name of the book. I hope you can see. Teaching by Principles. It's the fourth edition. It's an interactive approach to language pedagogy. In this book, you will find a lot of information about English teaching, like the approaches, the methods, what a method is, what an approach is, like strategies, some activities, some techniques. Like, yeah, you should definitely get it. All right, so let's go to business and let's get started. Well, this is an overview about teaching listening. I think it was listening or speaking. No, it was teaching speaking, right? We will start with teaching speaking. I'm sorry if my computer goes slow. I'm going to try to be calm today, because other classes I get stressed and then I forget about my English words and I forget everything and I start sweating because I get stressed. So there's more time than life. So if this thing starts going slow, I'm not going to get stressed. And then we can talk about any other things, right? Well, teaching speaking is always seen as something that goes together with listening. So, listening and speaking are skills that are always closely intertwined. I think that's the word, intertwined. If I'm wrong, please just write down or tell me that I'm making a mistake in terms of pronunciation or any other thing, right? But intertwined refers to this action or this characteristic of things when they go together, right? That they have this tight relationship that we cannot put them apart, and they are commonly combined or they are commonly known or named as oral communication skills. So this is one of the most important things you have to take into account every time you need, or every time you should teach your students to communicate, like oral communication. You should understand that there needs to be something related to listening. Oral communication skills is not just simply speaking or like articulating words. It goes beyond. It has to do with listening actually. um Pronunciation, there is like a controversy in terms of pronunciation, and this is so good to know, because everybody knows, because there have been so many studies that address this topic. But we know that most of the adults who are learning a second language are not going to acquire a native like accent or a native like language command or mastery, right? There is another word, but I just forgot it. We're never going to do it. I mean, I started learning English when I was, I think, 19 years old, but I was like, I was old, not that old. I was like, I mean, I was an adult, but I didn't have enough input from native speakers. But still, I think my English is good enough to communicate, and that's what I wanted for, right? I mean, I want English to communicate. I never tried, or I'm not pretending to be American or British or like any other nationality. I just need English to communicate, and that's what I teach my students to do. I always let them know, well, they're younger than me, and obviously they have more time to fix the situation. But still, I let them know that it's not so easy, and it's not so important for you to acquire a native accent, right? So we have to understand, and we have to start working from this understanding of adult learners. Uh, yeah, that they will acquire the language, or they will learn the language, but they won't be accent free, right? They will have their own accent. They will talk like Mexican people, as I do, or they will talk like French people, right? But using English. So that's something we have to understand. We have to cope with it, and we have to live with it, right? It's like, okay, go over it. It will happen, and that's something that you have to accept, right? And that's also a nice part of social linguistics, like the acceptance you have of your own culture, your identity. And that's good enough if you can just communicate, right? Um, it's that's what you need. If you cannot speak like an American or like a British person, then it's okay, live with it. Okay, there is something else we have to understand about speaking and listening. That is something in terms of how good or how clear. No, let me like rephrase. Uh, how correct I want to speak, or how fast or how natural I want to look. There has always been this discussion uh, about fluency and accuracy, like which one is most important, or which one is more important than the other. Certainly, we shouldn't answer this question, because I would say there's no answer for it. Accuracy and fluency are important till a certain point, or until certain extent. Accuracy is in it refers to clearness, like how clear you are when you articulate, and the correctness in terms of grammar and phonology, right? That's accuracy. That people can understand what you say because you are saying the words correctly, like pronouncing them, sounding them. phonologically correct, but also grammatically, that you are using the nouns, the adjectives, the adverbs in the place where they should be, that you are like no, not shaping, like in terms of morphosyntax, right? That the elements go in the appropriate place for them to be understandable and for them to work together with other elements so they can have like a message, right? So this is a big discussion because some teachers might say, no, it's more important that you speak grammatically correct or that you pronounce the words correctly as an American does or as a British person does. But then there is like other group of teachers who believe fluency is more important. And fluency refers to this flow of the conversation that goes naturally, right? Sometimes it's difficult, especially for not native speakers, because yeah, there are a lot of processes we're going through in our brains when we're speaking. So we have to think of our ideas, we have to organize them, we have to choose the appropriate words, um, and then like yeah, this is such a complicated or a complex process, right? So some people believe it's better to be like accurate than fluent, but yeah, we will find it out later on. What is true is that accuracy could be achieved by letting our students focus on the elements, for example, phonology, grammar, morphosyntax, and their own discourse, right? Every time they are producing the language orally, like in a spoken form. So, if we want our students to become accurate, we should reinforce those parts, but no with our handouts we always give to them, like answer this grammar exercise, because that's not helping them at all in terms of spoken language, right? So, you have to understand that we can teach grammar for spoken output, right? How does that work? Well, there are many different techniques you can work with, so you can let your students use grammar in a spoken form, right? Not just with exercises, but when they're speaking, there are like techniques such as echoing, for example, to correct your students and let them know they're missing an element in their sentence, right? Or sometimes like these repetition things or techniques we use, for example, when a student says, your mother is nice, when they refer to someone else's mother. Instead of saying his or her mother, they say your. So what you can use there, a technique would be like my mother. I mean, you don't even know my mom or something like that, right? So those techniques allow them to be grammatically proficient, right? In terms of spoken output and not and not just in an exercise, a written exercise. Hi Rosalba and hello Andrea. I'm trying to check like my presentation and also who's working here. It's nice to see you're here again. All right. So we can also work with fluency aspects when we let our students speak. That's it. It says that fluency is achieved by allowing your students, like allowing the stream of speech to flow. Just let them talk. And it is like practice and practice and practice. Obviously, there are other things you can do to improve fluency, right? Some exercises we work, for example, with tongue twisters. Sometimes it's helpful to let them talk about any topic. Just talk about these. Just have 3 minutes to talk, and you can tell me anything like that you want to communicate. And one important thing to know here is that sometimes we want our students to work with the two things at once, and that's not good for them. Let's say that I'm looking for my students to have the chance of speaking accurately, right? So I want them to be correct. If I want them to be correct, they might be slow when speaking because they're looking for the correct words, they're listening to themselves so they don't make mistakes, they say the sentence, the utterances correctly, right? Grammatically correctly. sorry, grammatically correct. So they need this time. They need to be slow because they're thinking of their ideas. They're setting the words where they should be, and I shouldn't like ask them to be faster. Sometimes teachers say like, yeah, there are so many gaps, and you are not speaking so fast, and you should be more fluent. Well, like just give them a break. They cannot do the two things at once, right? Because they're learning. If if they're more advanced, then you could work with the two of them at once, right? But not when they're like beginners, when they're starting to learn English. And the other way around also, if you want them to be fluent, then don't bother them with those things when they make mistakes in some words. If they mispronounce a word, if they made the mistake of saying first the adjective and then the noun, sorry, the other way around. So you should let them make mistakes, right? You should allow them to make mistakes. Okay, English language has a wide range of language varieties, as we mentioned yesterday, I think. We will find the British accent, Australian accent, the American accent, and then we can divide it into like more specific accents, like the Northern accent, the Southern accent, Texan accent, blah, 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 as it happens in Mexico. Like people in Aguascalientes sing, right, instead of talk, and people in the north have a specific accent, and people everywhere have accents. So that's something we need to understand, and we need to teach our students too. There is something people know as international corpus of English. This is like the standard English we could use and we can teach, right, to everyone, so they can use it everywhere. What do we mean by corpus? Like the appropriate words, the appropriate probably sounds and patterns and conventions for using English language within a standardized context. And obviously, we also need to understand that there are different, I wrote different, that word doesn't exist, I'm sorry, that there are different types of spoken language, right? We will find, for example, monologues, dialogues. We will find these opportunities for students to speak a planned speech, right? Or spontaneous speech. When you ask them questions like you just created at that moment, like on the spot. So that's why we need to understand that the two of them are correct. Actually, right now, I'm using a certain kind of planned speech because I studied in advance. I was thinking of what to say. I mean, I didn't write a guide. I didn't write a dialogue or something like that. I just studied. I was thinking of what to say, so it could be planned, right? But I am also ready for a spontaneous speech. Let's say that someone asks me something, then I will have to use my English to answer that question. And the two of them are good, and the two of them are necessary for our students to practice, right? And we also have interpersonal and transactional language or speech. Interpersonal refers to, well, we will see it later on, okay? Don't worry about that so much. But it is in terms of who you are talking to, or if you are like just saying the words without any feedback or any negotiation in meaning, right? Interpersonal goes more for something that you say, but you are not like waiting for a response. And transactional refers to this part of language or this moment of spoken language in which you talk to someone else and you are expecting them to give you a response that could be also considered as feedback, right? Okay, so we continue. I realize I have a lot of pet words and I hate that, I think. No, I don't. Okay, so here we have this question that we sort of answered yesterday, that is what makes speaking difficult. What is that thing, or what are those difficult situations? Okay, Aura, thank you. Hi, Terry. It's nice to know you're working with us, and I'm sorry you cannot use the chat. But yeah, when I finish presenting these, we're going to have this interactive part, and then I will send you another link for you to talk to me and ask me your questions and make some comments, right? So it will be good to hear you. Okay, so what makes speaking difficult? We somehow answered this question yesterday, and we were saying that speaking might be difficult for our students and also listening due to several aspects or due to several factors, right? And here they are. Like in theory, those are the most difficult things our students have to go through when they are speaking or when they're trying to speak. First of all, clustering. We saw that in one of our models, in the first one, I think, in which we were saying that clustering refers to these like phrases. Well, I have another word that is, yeah, phrases. Because fluent speech mostly happens or it mostly takes place in a phrasal form, right? We don't go word by word. We don't say, hello, I am happy to be or to be here. We don't do that. If we're fluent, well, like if you are not fluent, like so fluent, you still don't use word by word speech. You most commonly use this phrasal speech in which you put words together, you put sounds together that are different, like different phenomenons we learned. You remember those were I think they were called elision and other like phenomenons, like linguistic phenomenon that happens with language. And then clustering is difficult for our students when they're speaking because they don't know the rules sometimes, because those rules are not like academical rules or academic rules, I'm sorry. Those are more cultural situations that our students and most of the times teachers don't know, because we haven't had the experience, or we haven't had the chance to live in the States, for example, for a long period of time, so that we realized about all those clustering rules, right? We could explain to them some of them. We can, like, in theory, tell them how it works, but yeah, they lack this part of practice, right? Okay, they also find the difficulty of redundancy. We can have different kinds of redundancy. We also learned them, like in last module. And there is redundancy in terms of phonemes, morphemes, and even ideas themselves, right? You could be saying something like in several ways, but in the same communicative situation, right? Because some people are not accurate. As I told you yesterday, it happens to me, and it happens even in my mother tongue. It's difficult for me to express my ideas because I don't organize them like very well in my brain. That's sad, I know, but that's how it is, right? Katia, I don't know if I had said hi to you, but yeah, hi. But well, we have to understand redundancy is something difficult for our students, and that's not a linguistic skill we could develop, right? That's something more in terms of cognition, right? Like how skillful your student is to organize the ideas, not to repeat the ideas in terms of ideas. But when it comes to phonemes or morphemes or all those things, certainly there is something we can do linguistically speaking. We also have those problems with reduced forms. You remember contractions. It could also be reduced vowels, similar sounds, and we also saw all those characteristics of language, like with contractions, elision also. So those forms, our students don't know them very clearly. Like they don't know them completely because again, there is like a cultural part for this. And performance variables also, it has to do with how fast someone speaks. It has to do with how good the other person is to understand, right? Because sometimes you are speaking, you're giving a good message, and you feel that you are a native speaker because you did a great job using your words and pronouncing them correctly. But then it happens that the other person simply didn't pay attention, and it was like, oh no, and they tell you what, and still you feel frustrated because you could believe that it was you who didn't express correctly. So that's something also we have to understand when we're teaching students to speak, right? So there would be very like a lot of different variables in terms of performances, because speaking is not an isolated skill. In terms of like, it doesn't work by itself, but also a person cannot speak alone. Well, it could happen, right? But it's not like very common. And then also colloquial language, that it has to do more with culture again. If we don't teach them how to use slang, if we don't teach them some idioms, phrasal verbs, and we don't like let them know there's cultural vocabulary they could use and they might not understand, right? It will also be a problem for them when speaking, because they could understand the literal words, like they could understand the literal meaning, but that's not something that the other person actually wanted to express. Then there will be a big problem, a big barrier when they try to answer, and that's speaking. So colloquial language is a big barrier if we don't take care of it. Rate of delivery also, let me remember what it is about. Yeah, it has to do with fluency. Sometimes some people are slower to deliver the message, and some people are slower when they try to understand the message. So we also have to understand that part. Not all of us will speak as fast as the others. And yeah, so we have to understand there will be variations too. There is something important also, like stress, rhythm, and intonation. Those are part of pronunciation, I think. Yes, those are characteristics of pronunciation, but still it is part of speaking. And I would say this is like the most important characteristic of speaking if we want other person to understand our message correctly, right? Remember, stress changes meaning, right? In words, we saw that also in when we were working with. I don't remember if it was pragmatics. I don't remember phonology. I think, yeah. Stress changes meaning of morphemes, but also of utterances, right? Also, the rhythm and the intonation change everything, especially in a language such like English. For example, a question has a specific intonation. If it is an open question, if it is a closed question, they have this intonation pattern. So that's difficult for our students. And also complexity in terms of, or when it comes to activities, you should understand that your techniques should be complex enough, or like they should be difficult. um how could I say that? Like you should look for the appropriate level of complexity for your students. You cannot ask them to talk in the past or about their last birthday if they haven't learned the simple past, for example. That's in terms of grammar, for example, but also in regards of the things they have to do with the information they listen and then they respond. For example, a debate is a speaking activity, listening and speaking activity, but it might be complex for some students. It could be a simple debate about what you like or what you don't like using simple structures, but it's not about the structures you use. It's about the cognitive process you are asking your students to go through. They have to listen, understand, decode the message, and then give another opinion. They have to agree and disagree. There are several functions of language that they might not be able to face or to use at that moment, right? So watch out with that. And also the interaction. Remember, sometimes there might be some types of speaking activities in which we don't find interlocutors, right? So there's no one who can answer you, like answer to you, or someone who gives you feedback about what you're saying. So that's why we have to understand that our students might find it more difficult when they don't have the interlocutor, or when they don't have this opportunity to negotiate the meaning of a word. Or yes, I don't know if I make my point clear with this of negotiation, right? Sometimes, for example, if I am using a word, I can look at the interlocutor and make like a, I don't know, a face, Like, did you understand my word? And if the interlocutor tells me like, yes, 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 go on or continue, then I can I can give us granted or take as granted that the other person understood that my word was correctly used, right? So when there's not interlocutor, it might be difficult for our students to know if the words they're saying are correctly used, or if the message they're giving or they're sharing is actually understood, because there's no one who's giving them information about those situations, right? I will see the chat. I will visit the chat to see if there are some questions about the topics. Just write your questions down. Tell me if you don't understand something, if you want to add something, if you feel good with the class. Just let me know what you. Just talk to me. Like, just write me a message so I don't feel crazy like talking alone. Cluster history. It refers to this quality of language of being used like by phrases, right? We don't use word by word. I mean, we don't speak saying word by word, right? There's not such thing in which two people are talking and they go, "Hello, are you okay?" No, we say like, "Hi, are you okay?" So that "are you okay?" It's just one cluster, right? It's one uh, utterance. You remember that term? So it's a utterance because there's no space, there's not like something we stop, and all that big utterance could also be known as a cluster. So a cluster is this unit, this phrase is that sometimes is difficult for our students to understand because we put sounds together, lo barremos así como que se escucha que fuera una sola palabra largota, but it's not. There are many words put together that they sound as something different, as something weird, right? So that's a cluster, and that might be difficult for our students to understand. So if they listen to it and they don't understand it, so they can produce and they cannot answer or ask another thing, right? That's a cluster. Is it clear? Can you understand now, or I got you more confused? Just let me know and I'll try again. So yeah, that was the question. A cluster, in other words, it's like a set of words that we put together, we sound together, and they might be confused with something else, with a different word, because our students are expecting to listen to word by word, because that's how we get them used to, right? But that's not the most appropriate thing to do with them. All right. So if there are any other questions, just feel free to write them down in the chat, and I'll be so happy to answer them or to try to answer them. All right. Rate of delivery, of course. The rate of delivery, let me say it again because I forgot, refers to the fluency, right? Just, yeah. Rate of delivery refers to how fast or how like properly fast you are to express an idea um without interfering with the understanding of the other person. If I cut my ideas to think and to organize my ideas so I can continue with what I wanted to tell you, sometimes it might be difficult for the other person to catch the whole message, Imelda. So that's what it refers to when we say rate delivery. Like it might vary. Some people might be faster than others, and it might affect the understanding of the interlocutor, right? So that's what it refers to. All right, so we continue with this. There are different types of classroom speaking performance, right? There are like different activities or different like different types, yeah, different types of activities we can do when we're practicing speaking. For example, we have the imitative activities, or yeah, imitative activities, that it refers to these drilling activities in which you produce language. You as the teacher, you give you to your students a piece of language, and then they reproduce it, they repeat it, they imitate it. But this is not purely speaking activity. Well, not in the more strict term or concept. It's just a part of it, because you are probably working with intonation, you're probably working with pronunciation, but you are not working with understanding, communication. I mean, it is a speaking activity, but it's not a communicative activity, right? So you could have your students repeating, and this kind of drilling activities develops this kind of drilling activities develops psychomotor patterns in your students' brains, right? Psychomotor. It is that they, for example, can use the brain and their language working together at the same time, or they can remember that if they are going to use the sound th, they have to put their language like the, right? That's a psychomotor pattern. And that's good because you are helping them pronounce correctly, but that's not communication. But still, it is a type of speaking activity. Then there is the intensive, yes, intensive group, that is, for example, like a little bit more complex than the imitative, because your students have to practice phonological or grammatical patterns, but still is less demanding in terms of cognition, because your students don't have to think a lot in what they say, organize their ideas. They are just probably using the grammar structure until it is like stuck in their brains. It is stick in their brains, right? For example, they can be practicing with a structure like future. I will go to the park. What about you? I will go to the party, right? It could be considered as a drill, but still, you see, they're like trying to understand the grammar structure. Okay? And wait. Yeah, that's it about intensive. Then we have the responsive activities, and it is like a brief activity in which the students most of the times answer to teachers' questions, right? And they are simple, they are like more spontaneous, and they have to respond, but they don't have to interact so like in a difficult way. It's, for example, something like, how are you today, like at the beginning of the class, and the students will go like, I'm fine, thank you. And sometimes they can even continue with it, like they can say, and you, but still you are practicing speaking, right? And it's a responsive activity, and it could be used all through the lesson. Like, for example, when you are tired at the middle of the in the middle of the class, you can tell them like, "How do you feel? So far, so good. Is it okay? Shall we continue? Do you need a break?" And then your students would go with little chunks, like for answers, yes or no. Let's continue, or yeah, I feel good, right? And then there is this type of transactional activities that refer to dialogues, right? But those dialogues um, are more like, their purpose is to convey or like exchange specific information, right? That's why it is transactional. You're doing a transaction with information. They are giving you some information you need, and then you might give them information they need. For example, when you have your students exchanging their phone numbers, their personal information, or like a find someone who activity, that would be transactional, right? Then we have the interpersonal classroom speaking performances, that it goes more in terms of social interaction, right? This is with the objective not to know information, but it's for students to interact with others, to have a social interaction or to build social relationships, right? You don't care about the transmission or the transition of facts or information. You just care about the relationships you can build with others in terms of using a language. For example, when you are talking to someone about the weather, if you ask them about the weather, like, do you like this weather, or what is the weather like in the place where you live? It's not that you actually need that information or that you will store it in your brain forever or that you were like looking for that information. It's simply that you want to create a connection with this person, right? So it's for the pleasure of socializing. These interpersonal communication or these interpersonal activities are, for example, well, the characteristics of them are that they have a casual register. It means that you use simple words, informal words, casual words. You use colloquial language. It's emotionally charged language. It refers to those expressions we use, for example, like I think, I don't like, I feel, I consider, right? Because it is more about you. It's to make friends. You use slang, right? There is sarcasm in these kind of activities, and there are like hidden messages or hidden meanings that sometimes they require understanding between lines, right? You should explain to them. That's why I would say interpersonal communication or speaking tasks are the most difficult ones, because you certainly need a big load of of cultural knowledge, right, to understand those. I'm getting tired. I've been in front of the computer for the last 10 hours, I think, and I'm tired now. This is one of the most difficult kind of activities or types of activities because sometimes, again, it's not that we don't want to, but most teachers haven't had the chance to live in a foreign country, so it's difficult for them to explain those things, even to understand them. That's why all the teachers should be open to like continuous speaking practice with people abroad, right? I'm always looking for people to practice with, and I have several contacts from different parts of the world. We write in English, we try to talk in English, so we keep updated at least with this standardized or international corpus of English, right? Okay, and that's it. And then we have this other type, the last type, that is extensive, that is more like a monologue. It could be, for example, a report, an oral presentation, a summary, or like giving the news, giving a report about something, right? There is not like interlocutor, there is no like feedback or negotiation of meanings. So you see all of them approach different skills and approach different purposes. That's why there should be a big variety of those activities in our classes. We are almost well, no, we still have a lot of things to see today. Well, the principles for teaching speaking skills, like the advice for you guys to teach speaking, would be eight, and those are the advice we can get from the book. It says focus on both fluency and accuracy, depending on your objective, of course, but there's not such thing as the most important one. Fluency is important, accuracy is important. In other words, like naturality of the language and correctness of the language. The two of them are necessary and important. Ascertain, ascertain. I don't remember the pronunciation, but I looked for it. Ascertain that the complexity of your techniques is appropriate. Don't make or don't plan difficult activities. Remember, your students are learning, and sometimes we push them so much, and we want them to achieve or to perform certain kind of activities that it's not fair for them. So remember, and this is linked to the Piaget's theory, and the other Vygotsky's, sorry, theories. Remember that there are some things your students can do, and there are some other things they're not able to do yet, but they will at some point if you help them. Number three, provide techniques that spark the interest of your students. Uh, let's try to make our classes interesting for them, because we always go, like, we always use the same activities. We just print the same worksheet one, like, over and over again, and there's not something different they can do. Try to be creative, go crazy in your planning, like, do it, just dare to do it. Encourage the use of authentic language in meaningful context. How can you encourage it? Remember that as soon as your student starts speaking, you will have authentic language there. Just let them speak. Just let them be part of your planning. Let them be part of your class. Sorry. Provide appropriate feedback. For example, give your students what they need to know. Sometimes teachers go so technical when they say, you mispronounce this word because this phoneme was not properly said. You have to change it. And no, of course not. They don't need these. And don't tell them also those kind of things. For example, when you tell them the noun was before the adjective, and then this was, and the adverb is a causative, or no, this information is for teachers, I think, right? No van a contestar un examen TKT ellos, no les den eso, no se los digan. Vi una tarea que le dejaron al sobrino de mi esposa que decía así como, este modal verb se está utilizando en esta oración como causativo o no, no sé, o sea, lo estoy inventando, porque ni siquiera yo me lo sé a veces. Porque realmente esa información no sirve, o sea, no sirve para el propósito comunicativo, que es lo que estamos enseñando. Si vas a hacerte teacher de teachers y les tienes que explicar, bueno, lo estudias, lo recuerdas, se los dices, but still, like, make it useful, make it meaningful. Y hacerlo meaningful no significa que hables de... A mí me gusta, por ejemplo, hablar de cantantes como Pink y todos ellos, pero ya no es algo vigente. Entonces, sí se refiere a que lo actualices, pero también se refiere a que no les hables ese idioma inglés que no necesitan, right? Sorry for the Spanish switch. I just don't know what I did. Then provide appropriate feedback when they need it, and capitalize on the natural link between speaking and listening. Tell them that always that you listen to something, there should be a response. It could be a paralinguistic response with gestures, movements, etc., but also teach them how to do them, right? Okay, give students opportunities to initiate oral communication, right? This is really important. They need to start speaking. Don't get them used to be the one who speaks when he's asked, because that happens. And it happened to me when I went to the States. I didn't know how to start the conversation, and I was just expecting for someone to ask me something so I could speak English. That's unfair. Don't make your students trained monkeys. Don't do it. Let them be creative. That's what happens with language, right? That's what happened with their mother tongue. So let them be the ones who start conversations. Teach them how to do that. And they don't need to be the one who just answers when he's required to do so. So work on that also. Encourage the development of speaking strategies. Learning how to speak is not just responsibility of the teacher. Students need to be creative enough and responsible enough and autonomous enough to create their own strategies. How can you speak more naturally? How can you speak without so many mistakes? Well, that's up to you. Try to find strategies and help them create those strategies and share them with the rest of the class. Okay, so questions up to here. So far, so good. How do you feel? Should we stop and do something else? questions, comments, etc., etc., etc. I will give you some time to answer, and I hope this is being helpful. Hi, Sandra. I haven't seen your message. I'm happy you're here. I think it is like really interesting. We have learned a lot of things about listening, no, sorry, speaking today. And all those things are probably something we, in a way, know and do. But still, I think it's important to read them from a book, from theory, from research, from scientific data, because that's what we need as teachers, right? Something that actually like gives support to what we do. So, guys, questions, comments, something you want to share, something you want to add. Are you there? Of course, I can. The intensive. Let me remember what it is about. It's just that I wrote my notes on the book. I learned to do that, and it's really helpful. It's really nice. You understand things better. Intensive. Intensive aura, for you to understand it better, um, it's similar to imitative, in which our students just drill, right? They drill and they repeat the sentences or the structures, but the purpose here is not to create psychomotor patterns as we do in the imitative. The purpose here is for your students to practice grammar or phonological patterns or conventions, right? Let's say that imitative and intensive activities are similar because they repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and that's the only production your student has. But the purpose of the two of them are different. Imitative is just repeat, right? It's just to create a pattern. It could be like a physical pattern to know where to put your feet, to know the like how to open your mouth, right? When you say apple, you would say apple, right? And when you say hello, you have to say right. It's more for phonological things. But when we talk about intensive, uh, we try our students to create a pattern, but it doesn't have to do anything with psychomotor things. It go more with knowledge of the language. I want him to understand a structure, like to use the structure and understand the elements of the structure, right? Or I want my student to understand something phonological, right? Like, for example, it could be the intonation of a word or of a sentence. When you say, for example, what's your favorite dish? What's your favorite dish? You help them, you ask them repeat, 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 so they can get this pattern of falling intonation. Are you happy? That's raising intonation, so you have them repeat that sentence again. Are you happy? Are you happy? So you help them like integrate that phonological pattern through repetition, but that's speaking. Is that clearer now? Is that crystal clear? What does extensive include? Like what kind of activities you mean, Terry? You can write on the chat now. Yay! Extensive includes, for example, oral reports, summaries, oral presentations, like this individual practice of the language. It's without interaction. Short speeches, introductory speeches in a debate, right? It could also be like, for example, a singing a song. It could be right. It could be prepared, or it could be also spontaneous. Those are the kind of activities you can find. All right, I like questions. El primero the principles for teaching speaking skills. Ah, right. Yes, I'll show it in the presentation. Anyways, don't worry about your notes, because remember you will have this presentation for you. It is about the importance of the two things, like letting your students use language naturally, like fluently natural, and accurate, right? Like correctly. It all refers to like the two of them are important, right? Focus in both fluency and accuracy, like how fast your student can speak, right? That is related to this other word somewhere here. Let me find it. Mm, no, I can find it. No. So fluency refers to how fast someone speaks, how naturally someone speaks, and accuracy, how correct in terms of grammar, phonology, morphology, right? It's more like the theory of language, like verbs, verb endings, right? And fluency, it's like, you speak fast, I can understand. There are no gaps on your speech. There are pet words, but still I can understand. That's something I wanted to tell you, that let your students use those. Wait, I wrote it somewhere. Just let me find it, please. Hold on, because that was important. It was something in terms of authenticity of language. Students should be allowed to make mistakes, and that's correct and that's necessary. And you should teach them how to correct their mistakes, how to hesitate when they're looking for a word. That's something natural, and that's something we have to teach them. It's useful if you teach them to do it correctly, right? I remember the first times I made mistakes, I would blush and I would like sweat, and I would go like, oh no, I'm frustrated and I'm desperate. And sometimes I had panic attacks that I wanted to leave the room just because I didn't know how to correct my mistake. Teach your students to overcome those social situations. That's part of the social aspect of language. And can you show me the first PPP just to check the info I missed? The PowerPoint presentation. Sandra, it's in the same link I've shared with you. It's everything's there, but I will share the link again. Don't worry. Capitalize on the natural link between speaking and listening. What about that, Imelda? You don't understand that point? You want me to explain it again? But yeah, if you want another explanation, it's just that you should let your students know that every time they're listening, they need to speak, or the other way around. If they're speaking, that's their turn to talk, but in uh, soon future, they will become the listeners and they will need that other skill. So how can you make them aware about that? Well, through telling them, but also through doing like speaking and listening activities together always, so they get used to it, right? It's important for them to know that speaking involves listening, and the other way around. That's what it refers to. Okay, so if there are more questions, please just write them down and then I'll be back to answer them. Okay, we need to continue. This will be faster because it's very similar as we said at the beginning. Speaking and listening are like the same thing, we could say, right? They could be considered as the same thing and they are always linked. They always work together. So here we go again. Let me get another un segundo airecito. But here we go. Well, we have some misconceptions about listening, right? And that makes our practice difficult. That makes us make the wrong decisions and choose the wrong materials and like plan the wrong activities. One of them is this: listening is a passive skill. It is not. Listening always should involve production, whether speaking or spoken production or written production, but it's not a passive skill, right? There is a big process, an active process that should conclude in the production of language. Listening is just a part of the process. Listening is a one-way process. No, it's not. As I told you, you are being the one who's listening now, but at some point you will become the one who speaks, the speaker, right? And yes, so that's a lie. Listening is an individual process. Is not. Listening always involves two or more people, right? If you are listening to something, so for sure there's someone who produced those sounds. So it's not an individual process, and you should work it in teams or in groups, in pairs, because that's how it happens in real life. Listening skills are acquired subconsciously. Students just absorb them. It's a lie. That's not true. And that's what some teachers believe. That's why they don't practice listening. And they say, no, no, they're listening to me all the class. So that's more than enough. They don't need to practice any other kind of listening activities. That's fake. That's a lie. And that's dangerous, right? Our students need to practice listening. Our students need to work on listening specifically sometimes in our classes. Listening equals comprehension. That's a lie too, because sometimes you can be listening to specific information and you could be like skillful to identify some patterns of pronunciation that help you identify the word and its meaning, but it doesn't mean you are understanding a whole message or that that your comprehension is good. There are two different processes: listening and comprehension. That's why we have listening comprehension activities, right? Which is not the same as least purely listening. Listening and speaking should be taught separately. That's a lie too, and we have said why. Let me see if there's something in the chat. No, there's nothing else on the chat. Good. Okay, listening comprehension process. This process is important because it will help you define and plan your activities and your materials. There are seven like steps or stages in the listening comprehension process. The first one is decoding auditory sounds. You listen to them, you decode them. Your brain starts finding like if they're part of a language or of another language, if it's English or Spanish, right? Especially in bilingual people, right? That happens to me. Sometimes I'm so distracted, and then I start listening to something, and I don't know if like I have to switch my brain into the language it is being spoken. It happens to me because I learned English as a second language. My process was not so natural, and I have to work on that switch sometimes. All right, then number two, determining the function of the speech event, right? It is more about, let me find it here. Uh, if it's to communicate, if it is to persuade, if it's like the purpose of it, what is the function of this event? Do I need to answer, or I just need to say yes with my head? Or yeah, you need to understand the function of what's going on. Let me find them here. Just hold on. Yes. For example, if it is like a conversation, if what you're listening to requires you to answer, or if it's like a broadcast or a podcast, sorry, or something you just need, yeah, radio broadcast that you just need to listen to and pay attention, or if you need even to take notes because it's something more difficult or complex, or if you need to identify some information, you need to understand why this listening event is happening. Then number three, activating schemata, that it is like activating your the words, the background information you have about that thing, right? If I listen to a broadcast about dogs, so my brain immediately activates this knowledge I have about that topic, so I can process the information better, I can decode it better, and I can have a better understanding of it. um, and yeah, that's what happens automatically, and in it's a matter of seconds, right? If you start listening to music and the song related to love, then you activate your schema about the your last boyfriend or girlfriend you had and how terrible it was. You start activating like your experiences about that so you can understand it better. Number five, assigning intended meaning. No, sorry, for assigning literal meanings, what the words actually mean. Then you go into the intended meaning. Was the literal meaning what the person wanted to tell me actually, or he meant something different? What this where was there sarcasm? Were there any other elements of language that changed the message or the purpose of it? That's what happens in this process. Number six, determining the demand for short or long term memory. Your brain starts like deciding whether you will use that word or utterance for later on, or it's just a matter of seconds, right? And then you start saving words, like storing words in your long or short term memories. And number seven, retaining essential information or meanings. Again, the useful words or the useful concepts that you might need to answer at that specific moment. And yeah, listening might be difficult for our students for exactly the same reasons why speaking is difficult for them, because of clustering, redundancy, reduced forms, performance variables, colloquial language, rate of delivery. That was the term I was looking for when I was trying to explain fluency, right? The rate of delivery. Stress, rhythm, and intonation, complexity, and interaction. That's why our activities could become difficult and frustrating for them because of those aspects. We have discussed them and we have talked about them, and I think it's crystal clear. And then types of classroom listening. Reactive, you know them, you know it already. No, they're different. Let me find them because I have my notes here. It is here, yay. It is reactive because it's as if you were just a tape recorder, it says. You just respond to it chorally. Like, for example, you listen to the hello everyone, how are you today? And all the classroom goes together. Fine, thank you. And you, that's a reactive listening activity. You listen to something and you produce something like automatically and pre-established, right? For example, you say, okay, everybody stand up, and all your students stand up. That's reactive listening. They have a reaction after listening stimulus. Then we have the intensive activities, that those go more for focus on the components of language, such as phonemes, words, intonation, discourse made markers, right? All those words that you have to use later on. For example, mm, your students can listen to cues in certain choral or individual drills. For example, we're working with adjectives today, and then I say, yes, my computer is red. And you even use this mm, stress on the word. It is red. So your student to is listening to specific patterns of language, right? Another, for example, could be some activities to let your students listen specific elements such as stress, intonation, contractions, or grammatical structures. When you say, for example, I will help you today, or I'll help you today, right? I'm sorry, exaggerating the sounds just because I want you to understand my point, but I hope it is clear. Um, what? Yes. So I'll continue. Terry, I'll show you the slide in a while. Okay. Then we have the responsive activities that are, for example, um, you elicit your students to respond, to use speaking, but like in a simple form, just with something very quickly. How are you today? I'm fine, thank you. It's just simple, right? For example, it could be asking questions, giving commands also. It could be seeking clarification, like what was the word you said, and then your student would say happy. All right, so they're listening and they are responding, right? But not in such complex ways. All right, we have the selective activities also, that they are, for example, when you scan something, you listen to something, and you scan to answer to specific information, right? For example, phone numbers, dates. Those are the kind of exercises and activities we have on the TOEFL exams. For example, the selective activities. You could listen, for example, to speeches, broadcasts, stories and anecdotes. It could be lectures also, and like long conversations, right? And your students are listening to it, and then you tell them, why couldn't the person go to the party? Or when was the last time they saw the victim, right? For example. And the among the information your students can select from the big exposure to listening could be, for example, people's names, dates, facts or events, locations, situations, contexts, main ideas or conclusions, right? And those are mainly answers to questions such as when, where, how, why, how often, right? Then we have the extensive form of activities that it involves like a more complex process, right? For example, it involves listening to lectures or other input like teacher monologues, or it can be, for example, other long listening products. We can call them like that. TV programs, the weather forecast, for example, and it's considered, or it's also known, this extensive, as academic listening, right? Because your students need to pay attention to it for full comprehension. This answers questions like more complex questions such as uh, why do you think the person didn't want to go to the party if he received the message 2 days in advance? So they have to like to use high order cognitive skills, right? They have to reflect more and have like a full understanding of what the other person said. And then we have the interactive, which is my favorite, in which you receive the message and you actually answer. Like it is for social purposes also. And Yeah, so this is more like uh, integrated, and it says intricately intrinsical. That I think that's the word. That you cannot put listening and speaking apart. You listen to something, you respond, and then you ask. Yeah, this is the full process of communication. All right, so questions up to here. I'm so tired today. I'm sorry. I think I project that because I'm moving a lot. Like my I don't know. Yeah, I'm tired today because it's Friday. I think it's because of that, right? All the Fridays, your body knows it's time to rest and like watch TV or go somewhere. Unfortunately, we cannot go out. We cannot visit friends, but yeah, we can watch TV and eat popcorn or something. And yeah, we're about to finish. I know, Coco. It's a lot of information, but yeah, I know you can process this information tomorrow. Well, no, I will ask you when we finish. It's a lot of information and it's not at the same time because it's the same for listening and speaking because they are the same thing. So well, if we use like broad words, it's like they work together and we understand them like with the same process, right? So don't worry so much about this. I think it's easy to understand. All right, so principles for teaching listening skills include and focus on listening in an integrated skills course, right? If you are working with integrated skills course, so you need to help your students understand how important listening is. And you should also work with listening and specifically or focus on the assessment of listening um, sometimes, right? Que trabajemos con habilidades integradas no significa que siempre vamos a trabajar con todas. Significa que podemos darle énfasis algunas veces al listening, y es lo que te está diciendo. Hazlo de vez en cuando, es necesario y es correcto, right? Yeah, because all the skills, the separate skills, deserve special focus, right? So in appropriate doses. So do it in anytime you need it, right? Use techniques that are stimulating and motivating for your students. Utilize authentic language and context. Always authentic materials, useful language, right? And always include pre, while, and post listening techniques. You saw the process in which you start decoding, in which you start activating your schemata, stuff like that. It can help you. It is a guide for you to create a pre, while, and post listening techniques. You always need to include them. And number five, carefully consider the form of listener's response, right? Carefully consider the form. Let me remember why I wrote that. hmm I remember now. You have to consider the nonverbal situations to see if your students are understanding. Because we cannot open this window on people's brains, so we know if they understood or if they didn't understand. And remember the questions like, did you understand, will be like answered as yes all the times because your students don't want to show that they didn't understand. So you need to consider these aspects and you need to consider your students or the listeners' responses. And obviously, there are some techniques which you can use, like asking comprehension questions or help having them produce, right? So you see how much they understood. All right. For example, some techniques or some strategies. Yeah, some techniques you can use are having your students doing something with the information they heard or they listened to, choosing from some options you provide to them, transferring. It means taking that information into something like more tangible. It could be a drawing, a diagram, a role play, something that you can see or you can observe that like that the information was actually understood. It could be, for example, duplicating, like tell me the same thing but with your own words, right? Modeling. Mhm. For example, after they listen to something, they can model the order of the events, or they can model some other thing that is involved in the audio or in the speech they listen to, or conversations, right? Like have a conversation about what you just heard. And that's it for today. I think it's like a lot of information. I understand, but yeah, that's how things should be. All right, now I'm going to share with you this link to join me, to see, like, to listen to your comments, to listen to your wait, let me go get my other phone. Okay, so I sent the link already through the WhatsApp group. Um, yes, Terry, you can say it again. I'm broadcasting it to YouTube, so you can repeat the video as many times as you want. And remember, if you need another session to repeat this or to have more communication about this, yeah, just feel free to ask for it. All right, so I'm just waiting for you guys to join. The first six people would be are going to be able to interact with me, and you're welcome. You're welcome, Terry. I just want to listen to you guys, like a brief, like a very brief summary of all this information. Like what's new, what's the like something you learned today, like something very important that you consider you didn't know, or like the turning point of your teaching life, right? If you learned something here, okay. So I'm just waiting for you to come, like 10 more minutes, and that's it, right? We need to rest also. So no people. The link is on the group, so please just click on it. I don't need so much, like I don't want you to give me a long speech. I just want to listen to some of your comments, some of your like how you feel, like anything you want to share. This is an important reflection and conclusion, right? That listening and speaking go always together. They are oral communication skills. That's how they're called, right? So every time you want to develop oral communication skills in your students, remember you need to make good use of listening skills, right? It's not just about speaking. and correcting pronunciation, but it also has to do with listening. That's important. Thank you, Aurea. So I don't see anyone like joining me in the interactive part, and I think we could finish here then. Try to study. Uh, like I will send you again the link for the presentation so you can study more, like with the presentation in your computers. I will send it on the on the WhatsApp group. Please try to study. I'll see you next week. I'm going to I'll wait. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, I'll be in touch with you so we can decide what's next, right? If we can have like another session during the week, next week, so we can finish with writing and reading, right? So when we finish those, we need to see some soft skills, and that would be it. All right. Hi, Raquel. It's nice to see you here. Tell me before we leave, what are your conclusions, your reflections about this?
Wait.
So you have the link already on the WhatsApp group, so you can download the presentation with all the information we've been working with. Okay. So Raquel, I listen to you. Tell us.
Ah, thank you. Only, David, the principles for teaching and speaking skills, you say the first one. Yes, it is about the that is focus on both fluency, accuracy, depending on your objective. Could you please be more extensive on that point? It's just that.
Yes, remember we cannot say that accuracy or fluency is more important than the other. There's not such thing as the most important of the two of them. But yes, in a class you have to decide if you want to work whether on fluency or on accuracy, right? It's like a rule that you don't have to use the two of them in the same class, especially with basic students, like in lower levels. If they're advanced, if they're improving just their English because they already know structures and everything, yes, then you can use or you can have a class in which you address the two of them, right? But it's recommended that you work on fluency or accuracy individually, right? Like not in the same class. You decide what you want to improve, not the two of them, not always.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I think that's all for today. Thank you very much. Try to study. Well, not try to study. And I'll see you next week. All right. Goodbye.